Oak. Mama, Priscilla said, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Is that man dead? Loretta Vane didn't answer right away. She stood at the edge of the tree line, one hand gripping the axe she'd carried out to split firewood, the other instinctively pulling her daughter behind her. The figure in the snow hadn't moved since she'd spotted it from the cabin window, a dark shape against white, face down, one arm stretched outward like a man reaching for something he'd never quite caught. Oak. Her son, Fletcher, was 11 and thought himself old enough to make decisions. He'd already taken 3 steps toward the body. Fletcher, stop, he stopped. Loretta looked at the sky. It was the color of pewter, the kind of sky that meant more snow before nightfall. She looked at the figure again, at the frost crusted along the back of his coat, at the stillness that went beyond sleep. She crossed the distance between them in long strides. He wasn't dead. Oak. She could see that the moment she knelt beside him, his breath came in shallow pulls, barely visible, but there. His face was turned to one side, and what she could see of it was wrong. One cheek split open, dried blood matted into his beard, the skin around his eye gone the color of a bruise 3 days old. Oak. His coat was good quality once, she could tell. Thick wool, the kind a man pays real money for. But it had been torn at the shoulder and refrozen in a shape that meant he'd bled through it somewhere in the night. There was no horse, no pack, no sign of how he'd come to be lying in the snow 40 yards from her cabin door. Is he dead? Priscilla asked again from behind her. No, Loretta said. Go inside and clear the cot by the stove, Mama. Now, Priscilla. Fletcher looked at her. Oak. At 9, Priscilla was still young enough to do what she was told without argument. Fletcher was the one who asked questions with his eyes. He was asking one now. Help me turn him, Loretta said. Between the two of them, a 26-year-old woman and a boy not yet 12. They managed to roll the stranger onto his back. He groaned at that, which was something. His eyes didn't open. Oak. His coat fell open, and Loretta saw the shirt beneath it was soaked through on the left side, the fabric stiff and brown-black where the blood had dried. Get the sled, she said. The one your father built. Fletcher went without a word. The man's name, they learned 2 days later when he finally woke, was Grantham Fell. He said it in a voice like gravel dragged across stone, and then he tried to sit up and failed, and Loretta told him to lie still. Where am I? He said. My property. Oak. About 4 miles north of Creston Pass. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved around the cabin, at the low ceiling, the dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the quilt that had been her mother's and her mother's mother's before that, now tucked around a man who was a stranger. He had the look of someone assembling information, putting pieces in order. My horse, he said. No horse when we found you. Something crossed his face. Not surprise. Oak. More like confirmation of something he'd already suspected. How long have I been here? 2 days. He closed his eyes. He seemed to be calculating something. My children found you at the tree line, Loretta said. She kept her voice level. She was not afraid of this man, exactly. But she was watchful. A woman alone with 2 children learned watchfulness the way she learned to carry water or mend a fence line. Not because she wanted to, but because there was no one else to do it. Oak. You were unconscious. You have a wound in your side that was infected. I cleaned it. I'm grateful, he said, which cost him something. She could hear it. You don't need to be grateful yet. Wait until you're standing. He opened his eyes at that. They were gray, she noticed. The particular gray of creek water in winter. He looked at her for a long moment. You live here alone? With my children. He nodded slowly, as if that explained something. He didn't ask about a husband. Oak. She appreciated that. Grantham Fell was not an easy man to have in a house. He wasn't rude, he was quiet, which was somehow harder. He ate what she put in front of him without complaint and without much comment. He watched. He had the habit of stillness that some men develop after years alone, the kind that makes a room feel smaller because you're always aware of them, even when they're not moving. Fletcher took to watching him the way boys watch things they can't categorize. Oak. Priscilla decided within 3 days that he was trustworthy, and began leaving her drawings on the edge of his cot. He was up on his feet by the end of the first week, which was either a testament to his constitution or a sign that he pushed himself harder than he ought. Loretta found him at the window one morning, standing with one hand braced against the frame, looking out at the tree line. You're going to pull that wound open, she said. Oak. I've had worse. That's not an answer. He glanced at her. Something that might have been amusement moved through his expression. No, he agreed, it's not. She handed him coffee and went back to the stove. He told her, in pieces, over the following days, not all of it. She understood there were parts he was keeping back and she didn't press, but enough. He'd been a surveyor years ago, working land claims in this part of the territory. He knew this country better than most men who'd lived here their whole lives. He'd been on his way through Creston Pass when 3 men had stopped him on the trail. They'd taken his horse, his supplies, his maps, and left him to the snow. "Did you know them?" she asked. He took a moment before answering. "One of them. Who?" He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Man named Prescott Hale. He runs timber operations out of the valley. I've crossed paths with him before. Over what?" He looked at her. She could see him deciding how much to say. "Over land," he said finally. "There's a parcel east of the pass, about 400 acres of old growth. Hale wants it. He's been trying to get it logged for 2 years. He paused. "The only thing standing in the way is a land grant filed in 1879. I was the one who surveyed it." Loretta set down her cup. "Who holds the grant?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then your husband did." The cabin was very still. "Emmett Vane," Grantham said. "He filed the claim 8 years ago. I surveyed it myself. He knew what he had." He looked at the table. "I heard he passed." 3 years ago," Loretta said. "Fever, I'm sorry. Did you come here to find me?" "No." He shook his head. "I was passing through." "I didn't even know if you were still here." He looked up then, and there was something in his face that was harder to read. Not guilt, exactly, but something close to it. "Hale's been telling people the grant lapsed when Emmett died, that there's no valid claim anymore. He's been buying up the logging rights from the county seat for the past year." Loretta sat very still. "He's wrong," Grantham said. "The grant doesn't lapse, it transfers. To you as Emmett's wife, and to your children after you." He paused. "That land is worth more than Prescott Hale wants anyone to know." She didn't sleep that night. She lay on her side of the cabin listening to the wind work its way through the gaps in the chinking and thought about Emmett. About the way he'd looked the last autumn he was well, standing at the edge of the property line with his hands in his pockets, looking east toward the pass. She'd asked him once what he was thinking about, and he'd said, "That stand of timber there will keep our grandchildren warm." She'd laughed at him for thinking that far ahead. She'd thought he was being sentimental. She hadn't understood that he was being precise. In the morning, she made a decision. Prescott Hale came to the cabin on a Thursday. She hadn't told anyone she'd sent the letter. She'd written it in the evening, after the children were asleep, at the table with the lamp turned low, and she'd given it to the Hartley boy who came through twice a week on his way to the post road. She'd written to the county seat, to the land office, and to a lawyer whose name she'd found in a 2-year-old newspaper she'd been using to fill gaps in the wall. She hadn't expected Hale to come himself. He came with 2 men. She recognized the type without needing to know their names. Men who stand slightly behind and slightly to the side of a man with money. Hale himself was not what she'd imagined. She'd pictured someone larger somehow. He was medium height, well dressed for the territory, with a face that would have been pleasant looking if it hadn't been for the way his eyes moved, constantly assessing, pricing, weighing things. He had the smile of a man who'd practiced it in a mirror. "Mrs. Vane," he said, taking off his hat. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "You are," she said, "but come in." He came in. His eyes moved around the cabin the way they'd moved around her when she'd opened the door, measuring. He looked at Grantham, who was sitting at the table sharpening a knife with the calm of a man who had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. Something shifted in Hale's expression. "I heard there was a stranger on your property," Hale said. "Word travels," Loretta said. "This is a remote area. People notice." He turned back to her. His smile didn't waver. "I've come to discuss the land situation, Emmett's claim. I think there's been some confusion about its status, and I'd like to clear that up for you." "There's no confusion," Loretta said. "My husband filed that claim in 1879. It was properly surveyed and recorded. It transfers to me." Hale looked at her for a moment, then he tilted his head slightly. "Mrs. Vane, a widow with 2 children and no means to work 400 acres of timber. Surely you can see that holding onto a claim like that isn't practical," she said. "I was going to say wise." The cabin was quiet. Priscilla had gone still in the corner where she'd been playing. Fletcher had not looked up from the piece of wood he was carving, but his hands had stopped moving. "I'll tell you what I'll offer," Hale said. He named a number. It was not nothing. It was not what the land was worth, but it was more than most people in this valley would see in 3 years' work. Loretta looked at him. "No," she said. The smile didn't leave Hale's face, but it changed, got thinner. "Mrs. Vane," I said no. One of the men behind Hale shifted his weight. Just slightly, just enough. Grantham set down the knife. He didn't stand up. Oak. He just set down the knife and rested his hands flat on the table and looked at the man who'd shifted his weight with the particular quality of attention that does not need to announce itself. The man went still. I think, Grantham said, in the quiet voice of someone who is not raising it because he doesn't need to, you've had your answer. Hale looked at him for a long moment. Oak. Something moved in the timberman's face, calculation, anger, and underneath both of those, something that looked very much like recognition. He knew who Grantham was. He'd probably known the moment he'd walked through the door. He put his hat back on. You'll regret this, he said to Loretta, not loud, almost conversational. Maybe, she said, but not today. They came back on a night when the snow was falling hard enough to cover sound. Loretta woke to the smell of smoke. Smoke. Not wood smoke. The wrong kind, with something beneath it, resinous and sharp. She was out of bed before she was fully awake, moving on the instinct of a woman who has lived alone long enough that her body has learned to react before her mind does. She pushed open the door and saw the orange light moving along the far wall of the woodshed. Fletcher. She was already moving. Get your sister. Oak. Get out through the back. Mama. Now. She grabbed the water barrel and the bucket and went toward the shed at a run. The fire was moving fast, faster than it should have, which told her everything she needed to know about how it had started. She could see figures at the edge of the tree line, 2 of them, watching. She didn't stop to think about that. She threw the first bucket and went back for the second. Oak. Grantham appeared beside her, on the second trip, his coat thrown over his shoulders, moving with more speed than a man 3 weeks out of fever should have been capable of. He took the bucket without a word and she went for more water. And they worked in silence for what felt like a long time, but was probably no more than 10 minutes. And then the fire was out, and there was just the char and the smell and the 2 of them standing in the snow, breathing hard. She looked at the tree line. Oak. The figures were gone. They were watching to see if you'd run, Grantham said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the tree line, too. I know, she said. This won't be the last time. I know that, too. He turned to look at her then. She could feel the question he wasn't asking. I'm not selling, she said. Not to him. Not for any amount he's going to offer. She looked at the burned wall of the shed, at the snow coming down over the char. This is my children's land. Oak. Emmett knew what it was worth. I'm not going to be the one who gives it away because someone set a fire. Grantham was quiet for a moment. Then he said, The lawyer, the one you wrote to from Creston. Has he written back? A week ago. He's filing an injunction against Hale's logging licenses. Good. He nodded slowly. I can testify to the original survey. The records are in Cheyenne. I put them there myself. Hale can't get to them. Can't or hasn't yet. Can't. Okay. I made sure of that 8 years ago. He looked at her. Your husband asked me to. He didn't say why at the time. I think now I understand why. Loretta thought about Emmett again, about his hands, about the way he'd looked at the eastern timber like he was looking at a promise. She hadn't known. He hadn't told her. She wasn't sure if she was grateful or angry about that, and she suspected she was going to spend the rest of her life not quite settling the question. Thank you, she said. Oak. You saved my life, Grantham said. I was lying in the snow with a fever that was going to take me before morning. You and your boy dragged me into the warm. I would have done the same for anyone. I know, he said. That's what makes it mean something. The trial took 4 months. Loretta had not expected it to be easy, and it wasn't. Hale had money, and money buys time, and time in a legal proceeding is a weapon in itself. Oak. There were delays and motions, and a period of 2 months in the middle of winter when she heard nothing and understood that nothing was also a tactic. She kept the cabin. She kept the children in school when the weather allowed. She cut wood and mended and got through February the way you get through February in the mountains, by not thinking about it, by just doing the next thing, and then the next. Grantham stayed through the winter. She hadn't asked him to. Oak. He hadn't announced he was staying. He simply hadn't left, and after a while she stopped expecting him to. He was useful. He knew timber and territory, and he knew, more usefully, how to be in a house with people without filling all the space. Fletcher taught him to play checkers, which Grantham lost at consistently enough that she suspected he was doing it on purpose. Priscilla left drawings on his cot, and he kept them, which Loretta noticed without commenting on. Oak. They didn't talk much in the evenings. That was something she hadn't expected to appreciate as much as she did. The quiet of a man who understood that quiet was not the same as absence. In March, the injunction was upheld. The logging licenses Hale had purchased were ruled invalid against a prior and active land grant. Prescott Hale could not touch the eastern timber. He could not buy it, log it, or transfer it. It belonged to Emmett Vane's estate, held in trust for his wife and his children. Loretta read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket and went outside to stand in the March cold for a few minutes. When she came back in, she made coffee and set a cup in front of Grantham without saying anything. He picked it up and drank it and didn't ask what she was thinking. She was thinking about Emmett, about how he'd been right, in the quiet way he had of being right about things without making a production of it. About 400 acres that would be there when Fletcher was a man and Priscilla was a woman and they decided what to do with it. About the fact that sometimes the most important thing a person can leave behind is not money, not a name, not even love, but just a piece of land with the papers to prove it. She was also thinking that Prescott Hale had not sent word since the ruling came through, which could mean he'd accepted it, or could mean he was waiting. She suspected the latter. Men like Hale didn't stop because of a setback. They recalculated. She was going to have to be ready for that. On the morning Grantham finally said he was going, not leaving. He was careful about the word, just going to Cheyenne to file the supplemental survey records that would close the last gap in the claim. Priscilla cried, and Fletcher pretended not to want to, and Loretta made him a package of cornbread and dried meat and stood in the doorway, while he saddled the horse the county had finally returned to him. He came to the door before he left. "The survey will be registered by April," he said. "You'll have copies within the month." "I know," she said. He looked at her for a moment. He had the expression of a man with something to say, and not quite the shape for it. "Emmett was a good man," he said finally. "I only knew him for the weeks of the survey, but I could see it." "He was," Loretta said. "You've done right by what he left." She looked out past his shoulder at the pale morning sky, at the tree line, where the snow was beginning to soften at the edges, the small signs of something other than cold beginning, eventually, to think about happening. "I'm trying," she said. He nodded. He put on his hat. He went to the horse and mounted, moving carefully but without flinching. The wound had healed clean in the end. He looked back once at the cabin, at the door where she was standing, at the two children who had appeared behind her despite being told to stay inside. He raised his hand. She raised hers. He rode south toward the pass, and the snow closed behind him, and the morning came on slow and gray and bright, all at once the way March mornings do in the high country, where the seasons don't so much change as argue, and the cold is always looking for one more foothold. And the people who live there know better than to trust a warm day before May. But they open their doors to it anyway, because hope is not the same as foolishness, and some things are worth the risk of being wrong. Loretta stood in the doorway until he was out of sight. Then she turned back inside, where her children were waiting, where the fire needed tending and the day needed starting, where the land her husband had believed in was still there, east of the pass, standing in the winter timber like a promise kept across years and weather, and everything Prescott Hale had thrown at it. She put on the coffee. She had work to do.